The champagne glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the marble floor the moment Daniel opened his mouth in front of 200 guests. I did not expect him to smile the way he did. Cold, rehearsed, like a man about to deliver good news to everyone except me. "I cannot marry her," he said, loud enough for the chandeliers to seem to shake. "Look at her. I built an empire on image, and she is not the image I need standing beside me." The room did not gasp, it laughed. A low, cruel ripple of laughter that moved from table to table like fire finding dry grass. I stood there in the blue gown my mother had chosen for me, the one that took 3 fittings to get right, the one I had actually felt beautiful in for the first time in years, and I felt it turn to ash against my skin. Vivian stood beside him, thin, glowing, wrapped in silver silk. She did not even try to hide her satisfaction. She simply tilted her head at me, the way someone looks at a stray dog that has wandered somewhere it does not belong. "Daniel." My voice cracked on his name, 2 syllables, and I could not hold them steady. "We have been engaged for a year." "A year I spent trying to convince myself it did not matter," he said, and now he was performing for the crowd, not speaking to me at all. "But it does matter. Appearance is everything in my world. You knew that when you agreed to marry into it." Someone near the bar actually applauded. A short, ugly clap that spread to 2 more hands before dying out. I felt every eye in the room measuring me. My arms, my waist, the parts of me I had spent years learning to ignore in mirrors so I could function, so I could laugh at parties, so I could believe I was worth loving. All of it came rushing back at once. Every unkind comment I had ever swallowed, every diet I had tried and abandoned because I was tired of hating my own body. Every time my mother had said, gently, that Daniel was a good match despite everything. Despite everything, I understood now what that phrase had always meant. I turned and walked out. Not ran. I refused to run, because running would have given the room exactly the reaction it wanted. I walked, spine straight, through the parting crowd, past faces I had known for years who suddenly could not meet my eyes, past my own mother, whose hand rose halfway toward me, and then dropped, as if she did not know whether comforting me would make things worse for the family name. The night air outside the hotel hit my face like cold water. I made it 3 steps into the parking garage before the tears came, silent and furious, the kind that burn more than they fall. I did not hear him approach. I only felt the shift in the air, the sense of another presence, and I spun around ready to tell whoever it was to leave me alone. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat despite the mild evening, and he was not looking at me with pity. That was the first thing I noticed. Everyone else who had ever looked at me after a humiliation had looked at me with pity, or worse, a kind of relieved distance, glad it was happening to someone else. This man looked at me the way you look at something you are calculating the value of. "You should not have to walk out alone," he said. His voice was low, even, unhurried, as if the world outside this garage was not spinning at all. "I don't know you." I wiped my face with the back of my hand, embarrassed to be caught like this by a stranger. "No, but I watched what happened in there." His jaw tightened, just slightly, the only sign of anything like anger. "I have seen cowards before, men who need an audience to feel powerful. Your fiancé is one of them." "Ex-fiancé," I said, and the word tasted strange in my mouth, too new to feel real yet. "Even better." He reached into his coat and produced a plain white card, no logo, only a name and a number printed in simple black ink. Adrian Cross, nothing else. "What is this?" "A number you can call if a man like that ever tries to hurt you again, financially, publicly, in any way." He said it so plainly it took me a moment to understand he was serious. "You don't even know my name." "Clara Whitfield," he said, and something in my stomach turned cold. "I know exactly who you are. I make it a habit to know who is in a room before I walk into it." I should have been afraid. A stranger who knew my name, who spoke about hurting people with the same calm tone most men use to discuss the weather, should have frightened me enough to run. But standing there in the wreckage of my own engagement, something about his steadiness felt like the only solid ground I had touched all night. "Why would you help me?" I asked. "You don't know me at all." "I know cruelty when I see it," he said, "and I know it deserves consequences. That is all you need to understand tonight." A car pulled up beside him, sleek and black, driven by a man who did not so much as glance at me. Adrian opened the door, paused, and looked back. "Go home, Miss Whitfield. Rest. Tomorrow the city will already be talking about you, and you will need your strength for that. If you ever need something done, call the number." He almost smiled, though it did not reach his eyes fully. "I do not make promises I cannot keep." Then he was gone, the car sliding out of the garage and disappearing into traffic, leaving me standing alone with a plain white card between my fingers and a feeling I could not yet name pressing against my ribs. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my apartment staring at the ceiling while my phone buzzed endlessly with messages. Some were kind, from the few real friends I had. Most were not. Screenshots of Daniel's words, already spreading online, clipped and shared with cruel captions. My name trending in circles I never wanted to be part of. My mother called at midnight, her voice tight with something that was not quite comfort. "Clara, sweetheart, maybe if you spoke to him tomorrow, explain that you understand the pressure he's under, this could still be salvaged." "Salvaged," I repeated. "Mom, he humiliated me in front of 200 people. I know, darling, but the Pierce family and our family have done business together for 15 years. Your father's company depends on—" I hung up. I had never hung up on my mother before in my life, but something in me had shifted in that parking garage, some old, tired part of me finally refusing to bend the way it always had. I got up and walked to the small mirror above my dresser, the one I usually avoided at night. I made myself look, really look, at the woman Daniel had called an embarrassment, at my own reflection, tired eyes, dark hair falling loose from its pins, body that had carried me through every humiliation life had handed me, and never once given up. I thought about the card sitting on my nightstand, Adrian Cross, a stranger with cold eyes and a warm kind of fury on my behalf. I did not call him that night. I was not ready. But I did not throw the card away either. I placed it carefully inside the drawer of my nightstand, beneath an old photograph of myself as a child, laughing, unaware yet of the world's opinions about how a body should look. By morning, the story had spread further than I could have imagined. My phone would not stop ringing. Reporters, distant relatives, a cousin who wanted to know if I would give a statement. I turned it off entirely and sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee slowly going cold, replaying the night in my mind. Not the humiliation this time, but the moment after. The stranger, the card, the way he had said, "Cowards need an audience to feel powerful," as though he understood something about the world that most people spent their whole lives pretending not to see. I did not know yet who Adrian Cross truly was. I did not know that men in this city lowered their voices when they spoke his name, that entire businesses had crumbled overnight after crossing him, that the police in 3 districts owed favors they would never admit to. I only knew that for the first time since Daniel's voice had cracked across that ballroom, someone had looked at me and seen something other than a body to judge. I picked my phone back up, turned it on, and ignored the flood of notifications. Instead, I opened my contacts and typed in the number from the card, my thumb hovering over the call button for a long moment. Outside my window, the city moved on as it always did, indifferent to the wreckage of one woman's engagement, one woman's public shame. But something in me had already begun to change, quietly, the way iron changes when it meets fire. I was done being someone's embarrassment. I pressed call. The line rang twice before a smooth, unhurried voice answered. "I wondered how long it would take you." I closed my eyes, steadied my breath, and said the words that would change everything. "You said you don't make promises you can't keep." "I don't." "Then I want to know exactly what you can do." There was a pause, brief and considering, and when Adrian Cross spoke again, his voice had shifted into something sharper, something that sounded like the beginning of a plan already forming. "Meet me tonight," he said, "and I will show you what it means to have someone on your side who never loses." I looked down at my trembling hand, the one that had dropped a champagne glass only hours before, and for the first time since the ballroom went silent around me, I felt something other than shame. I felt the first small spark of power returning to where it belonged. I dressed slowly that evening, choosing a simple black dress instead of anything meant to impress. I was done dressing for other people's approval. As I fastened the last button, I caught my reflection again, and this time I did not look away. I saw a woman who had survived a public humiliation and was still standing, still breathing, still capable of choosing what came next. My phone buzzed once more before I left the apartment. A message from Daniel, of all people, 3 words long. We should talk. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling nothing but a distant, cold clarity, and then I turned the phone face down on the counter without replying. Whatever Daniel wanted now, it was too late. He had made his choice in front of 200 witnesses, and I intended to make mine in private, on my own terms, with a man who had not once asked me to be smaller, softer, or different than I already was. I picked up my keys and walked out into the evening, unsure exactly what waited for me, but certain for the first time in a long while that I was walking towards something rather than away from it. A black car was already waiting outside my building when I stepped out, its engine humming low in the darkness, and the sight of it sent a nervous thrill through my chest that I refused to examine too closely. The driver said nothing as he opened the door for me. Inside, the city lights slid past the tinted windows like streaks of gold and white, and I sat with my hands folded tightly in my lap, wondering if I had made a mistake, wondering if it mattered anymore whether I had. Adrian was waiting at a private table, in the back corner of a restaurant I had never heard of, one with no sign outside, no crowd, no waiting list posted anywhere. The staff moved around him with a kind of careful respect that told me more about his position in this city than any introduction could have. "You came," he said, rising slightly as I approached, an old-fashioned courtesy that surprised me in a man everyone seemed to fear. "You said you never lose," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. I wanted to see if that was true, or just something men like you say to impress women who have had a very bad night. Something flickered behind his eyes, not offense, amusement maybe, or respect. "Fair enough. Ask me anything." "What do you do exactly? People at the party last night went quiet when your name came up. I heard someone whisper it like it was dangerous to say out loud." He studied me for a long moment before answering, as if deciding how much honesty I could handle. "I run several businesses in this city, shipping, construction, a few restaurants, including this one. Some of what I do exists in the light, some of it does not." He paused. "I will not lie to you, Clara. I did not build what I have by being gentle. So you're dangerous. To the people who deserve it, yes." His voice did not waver. "To you, never." I should have felt fear at that admission. Instead, I felt something closer to relief, the strange comfort of a man who did not pretend to be something he was not. Daniel had spent our entire engagement performing kindness in public and delivering cruelty in private. Adrian offered the opposite arrangement, and somehow that honesty felt safer. "Why do you care what happened to me?" I asked. "You don't know me. This isn't your fight." He leaned back slightly, considering the question with the same care he seemed to give everything. I watched a room full of people laugh while a man tried to destroy a woman's dignity for entertainment. I have seen that kind of cruelty before, in different forms, and I have never once regretted stepping in to stop it. He paused. "But if I am honest, there was something else too. The way you walked out. You did not run. You did not beg him to reconsider. You simply left, with more grace than every person in that room combined." Heat rose in my cheeks, unfamiliar after a night of feeling nothing but shame. I nearly fell apart in that parking garage. "Nearly is not the same as falling apart," he said. "Most people would have collapsed entirely under what he did to you. You didn't." We ordered food I barely tasted, too absorbed in the conversation to notice much else. He asked about my life before Daniel, about the small architecture firm where I had once worked before my family pushed me toward a life of galas and charity boards that came with being engaged to a Pierce. He listened, really listened, in a way no one had in longer than I could remember. And slowly, without meaning to, I found myself talking freely, laughing even, for the first time in what felt like months. "Your family," he said eventually, his tone shifting, growing more careful. "They will pressure you to reconcile with him, won't they, for business reasons?" I set down my fork, the warmth in my chest cooling slightly. "My mother already called last night. She wants me to smooth things over. My father's company has ties to the Pierce family that go back 15 years. And what do you want? No one had asked me that question in longer than I could remember. Not my mother, not my friends, not even myself. Not really, not honestly. I don't know, I admitted. I spent so long trying to be what everyone else needed me to be that I forgot to ask what I actually wanted. Then we have that in common, at least at the beginning, Adrian said quietly. I did not always run empires. I started with nothing. In a part of this city, people prefer not to think about. Every choice I made after that was about survival first, and only later about what I actually wanted. What do you want now? I asked, surprising myself with the boldness of the question. He held my gaze steadily, something unreadable passing behind his dark eyes. Right now, I want to make sure Daniel Pierce understands there are consequences for humiliating a woman in public. After that, I suppose I will decide what else I want. The days that followed blurred together in a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. My phone still buzzed constantly, though less often now, the story slowly losing its grip on public attention as newer scandals replaced it. My mother called twice more, her tone growing sharper each time, insisting that reconciliation was still possible if I would simply apologize for embarrassing Daniel by reacting so publicly to his announcement. I embarrassed him? I said into the phone, standing in my small kitchen with the morning light slanting through the window. Mom, he called me an embarrassment to 200 people. I know, sweetheart, but perception matters. If you seem too upset, people will say you're bitter. If you seem calm and forgiving, people will respect you for it, and it will help smooth things over between our families. I'm not interested in smoothing anything over, I said, and I meant it more fully than I had meant anything in years. The silence on the other end told me my mother had not expected that answer. Adrian appeared again 3 days later, not at a restaurant this time, but at the small cafe near my apartment, where I had started spending my mornings, escaping the walls of a home that still felt too full of memories from my old life. He did not sit down uninvited. He simply appeared at the counter, ordered a coffee, and asked, with genuine politeness, whether he could join me. You're following me, I said, though there was no real accusation in my voice. I am ensuring you are safe, he corrected. There is a difference, though I understand why you might not see it that way yet. Safe from what? Daniel isn't exactly the violent type. He humiliates people with words, not with anything more dangerous. Adrian's expression darkened slightly, and for a moment, the calm, unhurried man across from me seemed to carry a weight I had not noticed before. Men like Daniel Pierce rarely act alone when their pride is wounded. I have already learned some things about his business dealings that suggest he is far more desperate than his public image would have people believe. Desperate men make dangerous choices. What kind of dealings? Nothing you need to worry about yet, he said, and something in his tone told me the conversation was closed for now, though not out of dismissal, more out of a desire to protect me from information he was not ready to share. We talked for over an hour that morning, about nothing important and everything important all at once. He told me about the neighborhood where he had grown up, though carefully, revealing only edges of a harder life than I had imagined. I told him about the years I had spent shrinking myself, both my ambitions and my body, trying to fit into a world that had never wanted me exactly as I was. You should never have had to do that, he said, and there was an edge of real anger in his voice, quiet but unmistakable. Not for him. Not for anyone. It's easy to say that now. It was true before now as well, he said. You simply did not have anyone willing to say it to you. By the time I left the cafe that morning, something inside me had shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. I was no longer thinking of myself only as the woman Daniel had discarded. I was beginning, slowly, cautiously, to think of myself as someone with options, someone whose future did not depend on winning back a man who had never deserved her loyalty in the first place. My closest friend, Eleanor, showed up at my apartment unannounced that afternoon, carrying a bag of pastries and an expression that told me she had already heard every version of the story circulating through our old social circle. I would have come sooner, she said, setting the bag on my counter, but I wanted to give you a day before I made you talk about it. There isn't much to say that the entire city doesn't already know, I said, though I was grateful for her presence, for the simple normalcy of someone sitting across my small kitchen table who wanted nothing from me except honesty. There's plenty to say. Starting with who was that man I saw picking you up outside your building this morning? Eleanor raised an eyebrow, unable to hide her curiosity even in the middle of comforting me. His name is Adrian, I said carefully. He was at the party. He saw what happened. Everyone saw what happened, Clara. That's rather the point. She studied my face for a long moment, then softened. But this one actually did something about it, didn't he? I could tell just from the way he opened your car door. Men like Daniel don't open doors. They expect them opened. I did not deny it. There was no point pretending with Eleanor, who had known me since university, who had watched me shrink myself smaller and smaller across the years of my relationship with Daniel, always too polite to say anything directly, though I suspected she had wanted to many times. I don't know what he is to me yet, I admitted. I only know that for the first time in a long while, someone looked at me and didn't see something to fix or apologize for. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then whatever this is, don't let your parents talk you out of it for the sake of a business contract. You've spent enough years being sensible for everyone else's benefit. Her words stayed with me long after she left, echoing through the quiet of my apartment as evening settled over the city. I thought about all the sensible choices I had made throughout my life, the career ambitions I had folded away, the opinions I had softened, the parts of myself I had trimmed down piece by piece until there was barely enough left to recognize in the mirror. Daniel had simply been the final, most painful expression of a pattern that had started long before he ever entered my life. I was still sitting with that thought when my father called for the first time since the party, his voice heavy with the particular disappointment he reserved for moments when I failed to behave according to the family's expectations. Clara, I need you to understand what's at stake here. The Pierce partnership represents millions in future contracts. If this rift isn't healed, we stand to lose everything we've built with them. So my dignity is worth less than a business contract, I said flatly. That's not what I'm saying. It's exactly what you're saying, Dad. My voice remained steady, though my hands trembled slightly around the phone. I'm sorry the company might lose money. I am not sorry for refusing to crawl back to a man who humiliated me in front of everyone we know. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding, equal parts terrified and exhilarated by my own defiance. For years I had bent myself into whatever shape my family needed, whatever shape Daniel demanded, whatever shape society expected of a woman who did not fit its narrow definition of acceptable. That night, standing alone in my apartment, I felt the last of that old shape crack and fall away entirely. My phone buzzed once more, a message this time, not a call. Adrian's number, though I had not given him permission to text me directly. I frowned, then opened it anyway. I heard about the conversation with your father. You handled it better than most people would have. Get some rest. Tomorrow will require your full attention. I stared at the message for a long moment, unsettled by how closely he seemed to be watching my life unfold, and yet unable to summon the fear such surveillance should have provoked in me. Instead, I felt something closer to gratitude, the strange comfort of knowing someone was paying attention. Someone was keeping watch, even when I had not asked them to. I typed back a single question. What happens tomorrow? His reply came almost instantly. Daniel Pierce is about to discover that cruelty has a cost, and I intend to be the one who collects it. I set the phone down slowly, staring at the darkened window, my own reflection ghostly against the city lights beyond. Whatever was coming, I understood now that I would not be facing it alone, and for the first time since the humiliation of that ballroom, the thought did not frighten me at all. It steadied me. I sat by the window for a while longer, watching the traffic below thin out as the night deepened, and I thought about how strange it was that a man the entire city seemed to fear had somehow become the one presence that made me feel safe. I did not know yet what tomorrow would bring, or what it would cost, but I fell asleep that night without the familiar knot of dread that had lived in my chest since the moment Daniel's voice had cracked across that ballroom. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept without wondering what was wrong with me. I slept only wondering what came next. Footsteps followed me the moment I turned onto my street, too deliberate to be a coincidence. too close to be anyone simply walking home. I quickened my pace, gripping my keys tighter between my fingers, the old instinct of every woman who has ever walked alone at night rising fast in my chest. When I glanced back, I saw two men in dark jackets, neither bothering to hide that they were watching me, their eyes flat and purposeful in a way that made my stomach twist with dread. "Miss Whitfield," the taller one called out my name, and I froze halfway to my building's entrance. "Mr. Pierce would like a word." "Tell Mr. Pierce he can call my phone like a normal person," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice even as my pulse hammered against my throat. "He tried that already. You didn't answer." The shorter man stepped closer, his companion flanking my other side, boxing me in against the entrance to my building with practiced ease. "He's worried about some old messages you might still have. Private ones. He'd like them deleted, and he sent us to make sure that happens tonight." Cold understanding settled over me. The messages. Months of texts where Daniel had complained about my body in ways he never dared say aloud in public. Cruel jokes shared with friends that had accidentally been forwarded to me once. Evidence of exactly the kind of man he truly was, beneath the polished exterior he showed the world. I had never planned to release them. I had kept them only because some small, wounded part of me needed proof that I had not imagined his cruelty. "I don't have anything you need to worry about," I said, though my voice wavered slightly. "That's not really your decision to make anymore." The taller man reached toward my bag, and I stepped back sharply, my shoulder hitting the cold brick of my building's wall. "Get away from her." The voice cut through the night like a blade, calm, but carrying an authority that made both men freeze instantly. Adrian emerged from the shadows near the alley beside my building, flanked by two men I recognized vaguely from the restaurant days earlier, their presence radiating the same quiet, controlled danger that seemed to follow Adrian everywhere he went. The taller man's confidence cracked visibly. "Cross, we didn't know she was under your protection." "You know now." Adrian's tone remained level, almost pleasant, which somehow made it more frightening than shouting would have. "Leave. Tell Daniel Pierce that if he sends anyone near this woman again, the conversation we have next will not be nearly this civil." The two men exchanged a glance, some silent calculation passing between them, before backing away and disappearing quickly down the street. Their earlier confidence evaporated entirely. I stood frozen against the brick wall, my heart still pounding, watching Adrian approach with careful, measured steps, as though he were afraid sudden movement might startle me further. "Are you hurt?" His eyes moved over me quickly, checking, though he made no move to touch me without permission. "No, just frightened." I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. "How did you know they would be here?" "I've had someone watching your building since the night of the party." He said it plainly, without apology, though I sensed he was bracing for my reaction. "I suspected Daniel would grow desperate once he realized the messages you have could destroy what remains of his public reputation." "You knew about the messages?" "I suspected something existed. Men like Daniel rarely humiliate someone as thoroughly as he humiliated you, without fearing some kind of retaliation." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I did not expect him to send men to intimidate you into silence quite this quickly. That was a mistake on his part." My legs felt unsteady beneath me, adrenaline draining away, and leaving exhaustion in its place. Adrian noticed immediately, guiding me gently toward the entrance of my building, his hand hovering near my back without quite touching, a careful respect for boundaries that Daniel had never once shown me, even in our most intimate moments. Inside my apartment, I sank onto the couch, while Adrian remained standing near the window, his gaze fixed on the street below, watchful even now that the immediate threat had passed. I studied him in the dim light, trying to reconcile the calm, protective man in front of me with the reputation that made grown men flee at the mention of his name. "Who are you really?" I asked quietly. "Not the businessman, not the man who runs restaurants and shipping companies. The real answer." He turned from the window, considering me for a long moment before answering. "I am a man who grew up watching people with power hurt people without it, simply because they could. I promised myself young that I would never be on the powerless side of that equation again. Everything I built after that, I built to keep that promise." "And the parts of your business that exist outside the law?" "Necessary. in the world I inhabit. His voice held no shame, only a hard, practical honesty. I do not pretend to be a good man in every sense society defines that word, but I do not hurt people who do not deserve it, and I protect what belongs to me fiercely. The word belongs settled strangely in my chest, not quite comfortable, not quite unwelcome either. I don't belong to anyone, Adrian. No, he agreed immediately. You don't. That was poor phrasing. What I meant is that I protect the people I care about fiercely, without condition, and you have become one of those people faster than I expected, if I am honest. The admission hung in the air between us, quiet and unguarded, so different from the calculated performance Daniel had always brought to every conversation about his feelings, if he ever discussed them at all. I found myself studying Adrian's face, searching for the calculation I had expected to find in a man of his reputation, and finding instead something that looked almost like vulnerability, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. Why me? I asked. You could have anyone in this city. Why does a woman who got publicly humiliated by her fiancé matter enough for you to risk exposing yourself like this, sending men to protect me, showing up personally? Adrian crossed the room slowly and sat in the chair across from me, close enough that I could see the sincerity in his expression clearly. Because you did not fold. I have watched powerful men crumble under far less pressure than what Daniel Pierce did to you in that ballroom. You walked out with your dignity intact, and then you refused every single pressure afterward to make yourself smaller for the sake of other people's comfort. That kind of strength is rare, Clara. I recognized it the moment I saw you. Something in my chest cracked open, gently, not with pain, but with the strange relief of being truly seen for the first time in longer than I could remember. I had spent so many years believing my worth was measured in inches and pounds, in how well I performed the role of an acceptable fiancé, that I had forgotten entirely what it felt like to be valued for something as simple and as difficult as refusing to break. I'm still frightened, I admitted quietly, of Daniel, of what he might try next, of whatever this is between us, if I'm honest. Fear is reasonable, Adrian said. I would not trust you if you claimed otherwise, but I want you to understand something clearly. Whatever happens next, you are not facing it alone anymore, and Daniel Pierce is about to learn exactly what it costs to threaten someone under my protection. He stayed until I fell asleep that night, seated in the chair across from the couch, refusing my offer of the guest room, insisting he would rest better, knowing he stood between me and any further danger. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through my window, and the quiet realization that Adrian had already left, though a note sat on my kitchen counter in careful, precise handwriting. Gone to handle Daniel Pierce personally. Stay inside today. I will call this afternoon. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, unable to focus on anything, my mind cycling endlessly through worry about what handle Daniel personally might actually mean. I had seen glimpses of Adrian's world now, enough to understand that his methods likely did not involve polite conversation over coffee. The call came at exactly 2 p.m, Adrian's voice steady and controlled, though I detected something satisfied beneath the calm. It's done, he said. Daniel Pierce will not trouble you again. What did you do? I had a conversation with him about the value of restraint and the consequences of ignoring it. Adrian's tone remained even, giving nothing away. He also received some rather unfortunate news about an audit into his company's finances this morning. I imagine his attention will be fully occupied with damage control for quite some time. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by a nagging unease at how easily Adrian seemed to dismantle another man's life, how casually he spoke of ruining someone's finances the same way he might discuss the weather. I understood, intellectually, that Daniel deserved consequences for what he had done, both to me and apparently to others, if the intimidation tactics were any indication of his character. But witnessing the full scope of Adrian's power still left me unsettled, caught between gratitude and a creeping awareness of exactly what kind of man I had allowed into my life. Adrian, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. I appreciate what you're doing. I do. But I need this to be about protecting me, not about destroying him for the sake of destroying him. I don't want to become someone who uses power the way he did, even indirectly. There was a pause on the line, long enough that I wondered if I had offended him. When he spoke again, His voice carried something gentler than before. "That is precisely why I find myself drawn to you, Clara. Most people in my life stopped questioning my methods years ago. You haven't, and I respect that more than you know. So you'll be careful? With whatever you're planning next? I will handle Daniel Pierce in a way that ensures he never threatens you again, without crossing lines that would compromise who you are in the process." A faint warmth entered his voice, something almost like tenderness beneath the careful control. "I meant what I said last night. I protect what I care about. That includes protecting your conscience, not just your safety." We spoke for a while longer, the conversation drifting away from Daniel entirely, settling instead into the easy rhythm we had found in the cafe days earlier. By the time we hung up, the fear that had gripped me since the confrontation outside my building had eased considerably, replaced by something steadier, something that felt dangerously close to trust. I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to return to some semblance of normal life, though normal felt like a foreign concept after everything that had happened. I opened my laptop, intending to look for freelance architecture work, something small to occupy my mind, and instead found myself staring at old sketches I had made years ago, before Daniel, before the slow erosion of every ambition I once carried. Clean lines, open spaces, buildings designed to let in light rather than shut it out. I had abandoned this work somewhere along the way, convinced by Daniel's family that a wife of his standing did not need a career, that my time was better spent managing charity galas and appearing at his side, decorative and quiet. I closed the laptop before the ache in my chest could grow any sharper, and instead called Eleanor, needing the grounding presence of someone who had known me since before any of this began. "You sound better," she said the moment she answered, before I had even spoken a full sentence. "Some men tried to intimidate me outside my building last night," I said, and I heard her sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Adrian stopped them. He's been having someone watch my apartment since the party." "Clara," her voice sharpened with alarm. "That's not romantic. That's terrifying. Do you understand what kind of world that man operates in?" "I do," I said quietly. "More than I did a few days ago, at least. But Eleanor, if he hadn't been watching, I don't know what those men would have done. Daniel sent them to intimidate me into deleting messages that prove exactly what kind of person he really is." The line went quiet for a long moment. "I always suspected there was more happening behind closed doors with you two," Eleanor finally said. "I just never had proof. He was always so careful about his image in public. That's the whole problem, isn't it? Men like Daniel spend so much energy managing how the world sees them that they never actually have to become better people. The image is the entire performance." I sat down heavily on my couch, exhaustion settling into my bones, as the adrenaline of the previous night fully drained away. Adrian isn't like that. Whatever else he is, he doesn't pretend to be something he's not. And what exactly is he then? Beyond frightening, and apparently very well informed about your building's security. I thought about how to answer honestly, aware that anything I said would sound strange spoken aloud, stranger still to someone who had not witnessed the quiet intensity in Adrian's eyes the night before, the careful way he had guided me inside, without ever presuming to touch me without permission. He's the first person since this whole disaster started who has looked at me like I'm someone worth protecting, not someone who needs fixing or forgiving for existing the way I do. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "Just be careful, Clara. Not because I don't think you deserve to be protected. Because I love you, and men with that kind of power rarely stay simple for long. There will be complications. There always are." Her warning stayed with me long after we hung up, settling uneasily alongside the warmth I had felt since Adrian's message that morning. I understood what she meant, even as some stubborn, hopeful part of me refused fully to heed it. I had spent years being careful, measured, small enough not to cause trouble for anyone around me, and it had earned me nothing except a public humiliation and a lifetime of swallowed opinions. Perhaps it was time to risk something larger, even knowing the risks it carried. That evening, my mother called again, her voice carrying a strange mixture of confusion and alarm. "Clara, I heard something happened with Daniel's company today. An audit, apparently quite serious. Do you know anything about this?" I thought of Adrian's careful, controlled voice on the phone earlier, the satisfaction hidden beneath his composure, and I chose my words carefully. I don't know the details, Mom, but maybe it's time the Pierce family faced consequences for how they treat people. My mother fell silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened in a way I had not heard in years. You sound different, Clara. Stronger. I feel different, I admitted. And for the first time since the humiliation of that ballroom, I realized the words were entirely true. That night, as I prepared for bed, I received one final message from Adrian, simple and direct, carrying none of the careful formality of our earlier exchanges. I would like to see you again tomorrow, not to discuss Daniel, or danger, or protection, just to see you, if you're willing. I stared at the message for a long time before responding, aware that something fundamental had shifted between us over the past few days, aware that whatever came next would carry us somewhere neither of us could fully predict. I typed back a single word, yes. Outside my window, the city lights glittered against the darkness, indifferent as always to the small, significant changes unfolding within one apartment among thousands. But for the first time since the wreckage of my engagement, I felt something other than fear when I thought about the future. I felt, cautiously, quietly, the first stirrings of hope. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. For tonight, I allowed myself simply to feel it, unguarded and unafraid, a small victory after so many nights spent bracing for the next blow. I turned off the lights and went to bed, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, my last thought before sleep was not about what I had lost, but about what I might still be allowed to gain. The knock on my door came earlier than expected, sharp and urgent, nothing like the calm rhythm I had come to associate with Adrian's visits. I opened it to find him standing in the hallway, his usual composure replaced by something tighter, more coiled, a tension I had not seen in him before. We need to talk now. What happened? I stepped aside to let him in, my earlier lightness evaporating instantly at the look on his face. Daniel is not backing down the way I expected. Adrian moved to the window, scanning the street below with the same watchfulness I had noticed the night the two men confronted me outside my building. The audit into his company revealed more than financial mismanagement. There's evidence of fraud, enough to end his career entirely if it becomes public. He knows I have access to that evidence. So he's cornered. Cornered men do desperate things, Clara. He's threatening your family now. Your father's business, specifically. He's implying that unless you publicly reconcile with him, at least enough to save face, he'll ensure your father loses every contract connected to the Pierce family, and he has enough influence in this city to make good on that threat. The floor seemed to tilt slightly beneath me. He would ruin my father over this? Men like Daniel do not view relationships the way you do, Adrian said, his voice hard now, stripped of its usual careful calm. To him, you were always an asset, a piece that fit into his image of success. Losing you publicly damaged that image. He is trying to force a correction, regardless of the cost to anyone else. I sank onto the couch, my mind racing through the implications. My father's company employed dozens of people, families who depended on those contracts for their livelihoods. Whatever anger I carried toward my father for prioritizing business over my dignity, I could not stomach the thought of innocent employees losing their jobs because of my refusal to play along with Daniel's demands. What do I do? I asked quietly. Adrian crossed the room and knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his, a gesture so different from his usual restraint that it startled me into stillness. You do nothing. I will handle this. You keep saying that, but I can't keep letting you fight my battles for me, Adrian. Not when the stakes involve my own family. This is not your battle alone anymore, he said firmly. It hasn't been since the moment I decided to protect you. But you deserve to understand exactly what I'm doing, and why, rather than simply trusting me blindly. He paused, studying my face carefully. I already own a significant stake in several companies that supply materials to Pierce Industries. By tomorrow morning, I will own enough to influence decisions at the board level. Daniel's threats against your father's contracts will become irrelevant, because the company making those threats will answer to interests aligned with mine. I stared at him, trying to process the sheer scope of what he was describing. You're going to take control of his company. I am going to remove his ability to hurt the people you love. Adrian corrected. What happens to the company beyond that depends entirely on how reasonably Daniel chooses to behave going forward. This is insane, I whispered, though there was no real objection in my voice, only awe at the scale of what he was willing to do. This is what protection actually looks like, Clara. Not empty promises. Action. His thumb traced gently across my knuckles, the first genuinely intimate touch he had allowed himself since we met. I told you I do not make promises I cannot keep. I intend to prove that to you again. That night, I could not sleep, my mind cycling through everything Adrian had revealed, the sheer weight of the power he commanded, and the strange, unsettling comfort I found in having that power aimed entirely in my favor. I thought about Eleanor's warning, about complications that rarely stayed simple, and I understood now more clearly than ever what she had meant. Loving a man like Adrian Cross would never be simple, but increasingly, I found myself unwilling to trade the safety and fierce loyalty he offered for the hollow, careful simplicity Daniel had always demanded of me. 2 days later, my father called, his voice carrying a note of bewildered relief I had never heard from him before. Clara, something extraordinary happened. The Pierce contracts, the ones I thought we would lose entirely, they've been restructured. Better terms than we had before, actually. I don't understand it. I might, I said carefully, unwilling to reveal the full truth over the phone. Did you have something to do with this? I thought of Adrian, of the quiet, ruthless efficiency with which he had dismantled Daniel's leverage in less time than it took most people to plan a simple dinner. I have someone in my life now who believes family shouldn't suffer because of one man's cruelty, I said. That's all I can say for now. My father was quiet for a long moment. Whoever this person is, Clara, I owe them a debt I likely cannot repay, and I owe you an apology for pushing you toward reconciliation with Daniel when I should have been protecting you instead. The apology, so long overdue, still managed to bring tears to my eyes. Thank you, Dad. In the days that followed, I found myself spending more time at Adrian's offices than I ever expected, curious about the world he inhabited, the careful machinery of influence and strategy that ran beneath the surface of everything he did. He did not hide his work from me the way Daniel always had, dismissing my questions about business as unimportant details unsuited for a fiancé's attention. Instead, Adrian explained things patiently when I asked, walking me through the logic of his decisions, treating my curiosity as something worth respecting rather than something to be managed. Most people assume power like mine comes only through force, he said one afternoon, as we sat together reviewing documents related to the Pierce Industries situation. In truth, force is the last resort, the blunt instrument you reach for only when patience and leverage have already failed. Daniel made the mistake of assuming brute cruelty was strength. Real strength is knowing exactly where someone is vulnerable and choosing carefully when and how to press on that vulnerability. That sounds almost gentle, coming from a man with your reputation, I said, watching him carefully. I am not gentle with my enemies, he said, but I am precise. There is a difference between cruelty and consequence, Clara. Daniel never learned to distinguish between the two. He believed cruelty made him powerful. It only ever made him small. I thought of my own years spent absorbing careless cruelty disguised as honesty, comments about my body dressed up as concern for my health, criticism of my ambitions framed as practical advice for a woman in my position. Adrian's words settled something in me that I had not realized needed settling, a quiet permission to finally understand that the years of diminishment I had endured were never a reflection of my worth, only a reflection of the small, frightened people who had inflicted them. My mother visited unexpectedly one evening that week, appearing at my door with an uncertain expression I had rarely seen on her carefully composed face. I wanted to apologize properly, she said, once I invited her inside. Not the kind of apology I gave over the phone, a real one. I sat across from her, uncertain what to expect, bracing myself out of old habit for whatever criticism might follow the apology, the way it always had throughout my childhood. I spent so many years teaching you to make yourself smaller for other people's comfort, my mother continued, her voice unsteady. I told myself I was preparing you for a difficult world, teaching you to survive in circles where appearance matters more than it should. But watching what Daniel did to you, Watching how easily the people I raised you to please turned on you the moment it benefited them, I finally understood how wrong I had been. Tears gathered in my eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. I needed to hear that for a long time, Mom. I know, she said softly. I'm sorry it took this long. Whatever this man means to you now, Clara, if he sees you the way you deserve to be seen, I hope you'll let yourself have that, without apologizing for it, the way you've apologized for everything else your whole life. Her words stayed with me long after she left, another small piece of the old, careful shape I had worn for years, finally falling away entirely. I understood now, more clearly than ever, that the years of shrinking myself had never protected me from anything. They had only delayed the moment when someone finally saw me clearly, exactly as I was, and found that person worth protecting rather than correcting. The charity gala arrived a week later, an event I had initially planned to avoid entirely, unwilling to face the same social circle that had witnessed my humiliation weeks earlier. Adrian convinced me otherwise, arguing gently that avoiding the world entirely would only give Daniel and people like him more power over my life than they deserved to hold. You do not owe anyone an explanation for existing exactly as you are, he said, adjusting the sleeve of his jacket as we prepared to leave for the event. But showing them that his cruelty did not break you, that might be worth witnessing. I wore deep emerald green that evening, a color I had never dared choose before, always steering towards safer, less noticeable shades that Daniel had once suggested were more flattering for someone of my size. Adrian, watching me descend the stairs of my apartment building, simply looked at me with an expression that needed no words, though he offered them anyway, quiet and sincere. You look extraordinary. The gala hall buzzed with familiar faces, many of whom had laughed along with Daniel weeks earlier, their expressions shifting to something more careful, more uncertain, as Adrian and I entered together. Word had clearly spread about the audit into Pierce Industries, about the sudden and dramatic shift in the company's leadership structure, and the careful whispers following us across the room carried a very different tone than the cruel laughter of my engagement party. Daniel found us near the center of the room within the hour, his composure fraying at the edges, despite his obvious effort to maintain his usual polished exterior. Clara, I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to still be standing after what you tried to do to my father's company, I said evenly, refusing to let old habits pull me toward apology or softness. But here we both are. His eyes flicked toward Adrian, calculation and fear warring visibly across his features. Cross, I assume this is your doing. The audit, the board changes. Consider it a lesson in consequences, Adrian said, his voice pleasant, almost casual, though the threat beneath it was unmistakable. You should have thought more carefully before threatening the family of a woman under my protection. You can't just take over my company because you have feelings for my ex-fiancée. I can, and I did, Adrian said simply. I now hold a controlling interest in 3 of your primary suppliers, and enough board influence to ensure your position becomes untenable within the next fiscal quarter, should you continue behaving recklessly. Consider this evening a courtesy, informing you before the official announcement reaches the press. Daniel's face drained of color, the calculated cruelty that had defined our engagement replaced entirely by naked panic. He looked at me then, something almost pleading in his expression. Clara, please, we can figure this out. We were good together, before all this. I studied him for a long moment, searching for any trace of the man I had once believed I loved, and finding instead only the small, frightened person who had always hidden beneath the polished exterior, desperate now that his image had finally cracked beyond repair. We were never good together, Daniel, I said quietly. You spent our entire engagement making me feel small, and I spent it believing that was love, because I didn't think I deserved anything better. I know better now. I turned and walked away, Adrian's hand settling lightly against the small of my back, not possessive, simply present, a quiet anchor as we moved through the crowd together. I heard Daniel's voice rise, sharp with panic, though I did not turn back to witness whatever desperate performance he attempted next. For the first time since that humiliating night, I felt no need to watch him, no lingering hunger for his approval or his apology. I had already found something far more valuable than either. Later that night, Standing on the balcony of Adrian's penthouse, overlooking the city lights, I finally allowed myself to voice the question that had been building since the moment he first appeared in that parking garage. Why did you really do all of this? The company, the protection, all of it. Be honest with me. Adrian turned to face me fully, the city lights casting soft gold across his features, stripping away for a moment the careful control he usually maintained. Because somewhere between that parking garage and tonight, protecting you stopped being about proving a point to Daniel Pierce and became something I simply needed to do, for reasons that have very little to do with strategy or business. And what reasons are those? He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear, his touch gentle, despite the ruthless efficiency I had witnessed him wield against Daniel's entire company. I think you already know, Clara. I have simply been waiting for the right moment to say it plainly. My heart pounded against my ribs, equal parts fear and anticipation, as I waited for him to finish the thought I could already feel forming in the space between us. My phone rang at 3 a.m, jolting me from sleep, with a dread I recognized instantly, the same cold certainty that had gripped me the night those men cornered me outside my building. Clara. My mother's voice trembled on the line, thin and frightened in a way I had never heard from her before. Someone came to the house tonight. A man. He said if you didn't convince Daniel's business partners to drop the fraud investigation, something would happen to your father. Ice flooded through my veins. Is Dad okay? Are you okay? We're fine. We're frightened, but we're fine. He left after delivering the message. Clara, I don't know what to do. Stay inside. Lock every door. I'm calling Adrian right now. I was already moving, pulling on clothes with shaking hands, my mind racing through every possible scenario as I dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, alert instantly despite the hour. What happened? Daniel sent someone to threaten my parents. My father, specifically. They want me to convince his business partners to drop the fraud investigation. Silence stretched on the line for a moment, and when Adrian spoke again, his voice had dropped into something colder and more controlled than I had ever heard from him. This ends tonight. I'm sending a car for you now. Do not go to your parents' house alone. I will meet you there. The drive across the city passed in a blur of streetlights and rising panic, my hands clenched tightly in my lap as the driver navigated through nearly empty streets. Adrian was already waiting outside my parents' house when I arrived, flanked by 2 men I recognized from the confrontation outside my building weeks earlier, their expressions grim and focused. Your parents are safe, Adrian said immediately, guiding me toward the house. My men have already secured the perimeter. Whoever Daniel sent is long gone, but we have enough information now to end this permanently. Inside, I found my mother wrapped in a blanket on the couch, my father pacing near the window with barely restrained anger, both of them visibly relieved the moment they saw me. My father crossed the room quickly, pulling me into an embrace that felt different from every careful, distant hug he had offered throughout my childhood, this one fierce and unguarded, stripped of any pretense. I should have protected you from all of this from the beginning, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I let business considerations outweigh my responsibility to keep this family safe. And I am deeply sorry. We can talk about that later, Dad. Right now, I need to understand exactly what happened tonight. My father described the man who had appeared at their door, his careful, measured threat, the way he had made clear that Daniel expected results within 48 hours, or the consequences would escalate significantly. Adrian listened silently, his expression growing harder with every detail, until finally he stepped forward, addressing all of us with quiet, absolute certainty. Daniel Pierce has made his final mistake tonight, he said. Threatening a woman's family crosses a line that cannot be walked back from. I already have enough evidence of his financial crimes to end his career entirely. What happened here tonight ensures that ending arrives immediately, rather than gradually. What are you going to do? I asked. Exactly what I should have done from the beginning, before I gave him the chance to threaten anyone else. Adrian's eyes met mine, steady and unwavering. I am handing everything I have to the authorities tonight. The fraud evidence, the intimidation tactics, all of it. Daniel Pierce will face consequences that exist entirely within the law this time, consequences he cannot buy or threaten his way out of. You're involving the police? I thought men like you avoided that kind of exposure. A faint, humorless smile crossed his face. Men like me avoid exposure when it threatens our own interests. Protecting the people I care about outweighs that consideration entirely. Besides, I have taken precautions to ensure my own involvement remains appropriately distant from the official investigation. My concern tonight is ensuring Daniel never has the opportunity to threaten your family again, by any means necessary. True to his word, within 72 hours, the story broke across every major news outlet in the city. Daniel Pierce, once celebrated as one of the youngest and most successful business leaders in the region, arrested on charges of financial fraud, evidence of years of falsified records and stolen investor funds, laid bare for the entire world to see. The intimidation tactics used against my family surfaced as well, transforming public opinion entirely, the same crowd that had once laughed at my humiliation, now expressing outrage on my behalf. The same social circles that had turned their backs on me, now eager to distance themselves from any association with Daniel's name. I felt no satisfaction watching his downfall unfold across every screen and headline, only a quiet, exhausted relief that the danger to my family had finally passed. Vivian, his mistress, disappeared from public view entirely within days, her own reputation, too closely tied to his, to survive the scandal untouched. Eleanor visited that week, settling into my kitchen with the same easy comfort she always brought, though her expression carried a seriousness I rarely saw from her. I have to admit, when I warned you about complications, I wasn't imagining anything quite this dramatic. Neither was I said, pouring coffee for both of us with hands that had finally stopped trembling. But you're safe, your family is safe, and Daniel is finally facing consequences for exactly the kind of person he always was, just hidden more carefully than most of us realized. Eleanor studied me carefully. How are you, really? Beyond the immediate crisis. I considered the question honestly, surprised by how easily an answer came. I feel like myself again. Maybe more myself than I've felt in years, honestly. I spent so long trying to shrink into whatever shape Daniel and my family and this entire city expected of me, and somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, I stopped doing that entirely. And Adrian? Warmth spread through my chest at the mention of his name, steady and unhurried, nothing like the anxious uncertainty I had always associated with love throughout my relationship with Daniel. Adrian sees me exactly as I am, and has never once asked me to be anything different. I didn't know that kind of love existed until now. Eleanor smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Then I suppose my warnings were unnecessary after all. Not unnecessary, I said. Just proof that some risks are worth taking, even knowing the complications they might carry. I attended one session of the trial, though Adrian had gently suggested I might prefer to stay away entirely, warning that facing Daniel again in that setting might reopen wounds I had only just begun to heal. I went anyway, needing to witness the moment for myself, needing to see with my own eyes that the man who had once made me feel worthless in front of 200 people now stood small and diminished before a judge who owed him nothing. Daniel looked different in the courtroom, stripped of the polished confidence that had always defined him at every gala and business dinner I had ever attended at his side. His suit hung slightly loose, as though he had lost weight in the weeks since his arrest, his eyes carrying dark circles that no amount of concealer could fully hide. When his gaze found mine across the room, I expected to feel some flicker of the old fear, the old desire to shrink beneath his attention. Instead, I felt nothing but a distant, clear-eyed pity for a man who had spent his entire life building a fortress of appearance around a foundation of fraud and cruelty, only to watch it collapse entirely the moment someone finally held him accountable. The prosecutor laid out the evidence methodically: years of falsified financial records, stolen investor funds redirected into personal accounts, a pattern of behavior that had clearly begun long before he ever humiliated me at that engagement party. Listening to the details, I understood something I had not fully grasped before: that Daniel's cruelty toward me had never been about my body or my worthiness as a partner. It had been about control, about maintaining an image increasingly difficult to sustain as his empire crumbled beneath layers of deception even he could no longer manage. During a recess, Daniel's lawyer approached me in the hallway, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Whitfield, Daniel would like a moment, if you're willing. I considered refusing entirely, but some part of me needed the closure a conversation might provide, needed to face him one final time on my own terms rather than his. I agreed, and moments later found myself standing across from Daniel in a small side room, a guard positioned discreetly near the door. "You look well," he said, and for a moment, the old performance flickered back into his voice, some remnant of the charm that had once convinced me his interest in me was genuine. "I am well," I said simply, refusing to offer him anything more than that. I never meant for any of this to happen. The company, your family, all of it spiraled so far beyond what I intended. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from happier times, back when I still believed his affection for me was real, rather than convenient. I was drowning, Clara. The fraud started small, a way to cover gaps during a difficult quarter, and then it became impossible to stop without everything unraveling entirely. I took it out on you because you were the one person who never demanded anything from me. You were safe. Safe, I repeated, something hardening in my chest. You mean I was convenient? Someone you could humiliate without consequence, because you assumed I had nowhere else to go, no one who would ever choose me over the comfort of staying quiet. He had no response to that, his silence confirming what I had already understood. I hope you use whatever time comes next to actually become someone different, I said, moving toward the door. Not for my sake, for your own. But I am no longer the person responsible for helping you find that growth, Daniel. I never should have been in the first place. I left the courtroom that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in months, the last threads connecting me to my old life with Daniel finally, completely severed. Adrian was waiting outside, having insisted on accompanying me despite my assurance that I would be fine alone, and the moment he saw my face, some of the tension in his shoulders visibly eased. "How was it?" he asked, falling into step beside me as we walked toward the car. "Freeing," I said honestly. I think I needed to see him one last time, small and stripped of everything he used to hide behind, to fully understand that none of what happened was ever about something lacking in me. "It never was," Adrian said quietly. "I hope you know that as certainly as I do." "I'm starting to," I admitted. Every day, a little more certainly. 2 weeks later, with Daniel's trial proceedings underway, and my family finally settling back into a sense of normalcy, Adrian invited me to dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the harbor, quieter and more intimate than the grand establishment where we had first properly spoken weeks earlier. The city lights reflected across the dark water as we sat together, the tension of the past weeks finally beginning to ease from both our shoulders. "I've been thinking about something," Adrian said, once our meal had been cleared away, his usual composure carrying a subtle nervousness I had never witnessed from him before. "About everything that happened between the night I found you in that parking garage and tonight." "So have I admitted. "It feels impossible that only a few months have passed. It feels like an entire lifetime." "In many ways it has been," he said. "You are not the same woman who walked out of that ballroom, Clara. You've become someone entirely different, though I suspect the strength was always there, simply buried beneath years of people telling you it didn't exist. You helped me find it again." "I only made space for you to find it yourself," he corrected gently. "The strength was always yours. I simply refused to let anyone take it from you further while you rediscovered it." He reached into his jacket then, producing a small velvet box that made my breath catch in my throat, though he did not open it immediately, instead, simply holding it between us, his eyes steady on mine. "I am not going to pretend this is a simple decision," he said. "Loving me means accepting a world that carries genuine danger, genuine complexity, things that most people would run from without hesitation. I understand if that reality gives you pause." "Adrian, let me finish," he said gently. "I have spent my entire adult life building power, specifically so that no one could ever hurt the people I care about, the way people once hurt me, and everyone I loved growing up. I never expected to find someone who understood that mission without fear, who matched that strength with her own, instead of shrinking from it. I am not asking you to accept a fairy tale. I am asking you to accept exactly who I am, danger and complexity and all, the same way I have chosen to accept exactly who you are, without asking you to be smaller or different than you already are. He opened the box then, revealing a ring far simpler than I expected from a man of his wealth, elegant and understated, chosen with obvious care rather than ostentation. Clara Whitfield, I am not offering you an image to maintain, or a role to perform for the benefit of anyone watching. I am offering you a partnership, built on respect and honesty, and the kind of protection that asks nothing in return except the chance to keep choosing you, every single day. Will you choose me the same way, fully, without condition? Tears blurred my vision, though these tears carried none of the humiliation and grief of that ballroom months earlier, only overwhelming gratitude for a love that had never once asked me to be anything other than exactly myself. Yes, I said, my voice steady despite the tears. Yes, completely, without condition. He slid the ring onto my finger with careful, reverent hands, and when he kissed me, gentle and unhurried, I felt none of the performance that had always colored every intimate moment with Daniel, only genuine, unguarded tenderness from a man who had proven, again and again, that his actions matched his words entirely. We sat together long after our meal ended, watching the harbor lights ripple across the dark water, and I thought about the woman I had been standing in that parking garage months earlier, humiliated and broken, certain that her worth had been permanently diminished by a man who never deserved her loyalty in the first place. That woman could not have imagined this moment, could not have believed that abandonment might become the beginning of something far more valuable than anything she had lost. Daniel Pierce would spend years facing the consequences of his cruelty, his empire dismantled entirely, his name transformed from celebrated success story into cautionary tale. I felt no need to dwell on his downfall any longer, no lingering need for revenge or vindication. I had already found something far more meaningful than watching him suffer. I had found a man who looked at every part of me, my body, my ambitions, my fierce refusal to shrink for anyone's comfort, and called all of it beautiful, called all of it enough, called all of it exactly what he had been searching for his entire life. As we finally rose to leave the restaurant, Adrian's hand finding mine with easy, familiar warmth, I understood completely what Eleanor had tried to warn me about weeks earlier, and how wonderfully, unexpectedly wrong her caution had turned out to be. Complications had come, dangerous and real, but they had led not to heartbreak, but to a love built on something far sturdier than image or appearance ever could provide. They had led me home. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent as always to the quiet transformations happening within the lives of its millions of inhabitants. But walking beside Adrian that night, the ring catching starlight on my finger, I felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, entirely and completely myself, claimed not by cruelty or expectation, but by a love that had never once asked me to be anyone other than exactly who I already was.